Yes. Um, so what is this concept of World Constitution Day? I'll take a minute or two to explain that, right? So it is aims at creating a day for celebrating constitutions around the world, a day in common wherein all of the citizens of the world who have a written constitution can join together and celebrate this marvel called as the written constitution. You all will be knowing that many of the countries around the world have something known as National Law Day or National Constitution Day, wherein each of these countries celebrate their own constitution adoption or ratification day. So, what is the need for World Constitution Day? And before that, when is World Constitution Day? For the very fact that we have this event, you would be knowing that it is on the 1st of August. So, what is the significance of 1st of August? It is an initiative done by one Mr. Jim Scherrer. He is the founder and director of International Bundesbrief Society. So he brought me in for this event. So what does this society do, and why August 1? So August 1 is the date in which something known as the Bundesbrief was adopted in Switzerland. So it is similar to the Magna Carta. It is the Federal Charter of 1291. So it is one of the earliest constitutional documents in Switzerland, which forms the basis for modern Switzerland democracy, right? So this is a day to commemorate the adoption of that document. It's a sort of a tent pole wherein people around the world can come together and celebrate the concept of a written constitution. It enables us to look at what you call as a cross-constitutional perspective, right? So at the end of the day, we are all human beings, and we can learn from not only our own mistakes and our own successes, but also from the mistakes and successes of our fellow beings transcending national boundaries. So this gives us an opportunity to look at countries around the world and their constitutions, and look at what is their successes and what is their failure. So it is by and large this attempt that covers the why part and how part. So this is the first time we are organizing World Constitution Day 2021. So I have been tasked with the responsibility of taking care of India as such. I have not been able to marshal that much of events or resources, and I thought I would start off with a presentation this year. So this is an open invitation for all of you, that even today, from today onwards, you have say around 3 to 5 days. If you are interested to organize an event or to present something, make a recording of it, we'll put it up in the website, as you can see in the website that I already shared with you, worldconstitutionday.org. Go do visit there. And if you want to participate in this event, it can be any talk or any event related to constitution as such, right? So if you are interested, you can also extend your participation, and we will go through and try to get it published in the website, right? So this is the endeavor of World Constitution Day. Going ahead, we expect this to be a bigger and better event in the upcoming years. With the support of enthusiastic students like you, I am sure that it will be a great event in the coming years. Right, this is a general introduction of the concept of World Constitution Day. Now coming to my topic, the concept of cultural heritage in the Constitution of India. So a panoramic perspective, that is the topic that I've taken up for discussion today, right? So what is the relevance of this topic? What do I intend to convey through this brief talk? And what is the objective? That is what I would like to clarify first and foremost, right? So before jumping into the concept of cultural heritage, you have to bear in mind that it is composed of two words, so to speak, right? Culture and heritage. So we have to understand the term culture first and foremost. So in order to understand the term, we go into the etymological roots, wherein you look into the term culture, and we say that it is derived from the Latin word cultura, which means to grow or to cultivate, right? So culture is something that grows organically, that evolves over a period of time. We know that the concept of culture is, you can say, reflected in many aspects of human life, not just the constitution, right? So it transcends the constitution and permeates all facets of human life. That is a point we have to bear in mind. So first and foremost, when I say this concept of cultural heritage and the constitution, I am talking about what is the influence of the constitution on the culture, the concept of cultural heritage and vice versa, right? So influence of culture in constitution making. You all know that cultures as such, or constitutions rather, do not evolve out of a vacuum. We cannot conjure constitutions out of thin air. They have to have a certain backing, right? That backing may be lived experiences of people, as we had the experience under the colonial rule of the Britishers, or it may be the history, ancient, medieval and modern history. We take reference to history, or it may be philosophy, right? Indic or Indian way of life that has played a pivotal role in the framing of the Indian constitution. Sometimes we may also take into or look into account the concept of myth, folklore and tradition. All these are factors that influence, and broadly this falls under the purview of what you call as culture. So as I've already told you, the concept of culture has a cause and effect relation in respect of the constitution. On one side, it is also responsible for the creation of certain provisions within the constitution. On the other hand, it is also protected by the constitution itself, right? So it is affected and it affects the Indian constitution is what I would say. And the concept of cultural heritage, so to speak, it has dual effects. We talk about culture in varying senses. We say this is our culture, he belongs to my culture, right? So in that sense, culture has a dual effect. One, it unifies, it brings people together, saying that we all are brothers and sisters on this basis. And at the same time, it has an alienating effect. We say that this is the broad canvas of our country, and anybody who is beyond this is alien to us, right? So it brings in the dichotomy of what you call as native versus alien, the global north versus the global south, the east versus the west, what you call as the Europeans versus the Asians or Africans, so to speak, right? So this is the dual role of culture. It binds and it separates all at the same time, right? So what is the relevance of culture in constitution making, right? So whenever a nation comes together and forms itself or unites itself into a nation state, there is a need for shared commonality. Absolutely disjointed group of individuals or communities cannot call themselves states. There should be some element of commonality that will help to bind all nation states together. So shared values is what we call as culture in this context, which is the basis for constitutions around the world. But you have to bear in mind, particularly federal countries like India, Canada and so to speak, other multicultural societies, that our nation is premised on the notion of unity and not uniformity. I hope you can comprehend the difference, that unity requires a commonality that binds us together, while at the same time accommodating a wide range of different cultures, religions, traditions and practices within the common fold. So our endeavor should be to ensure unity, not uniformity. And one size does not fit all when we talk about a constitution such as India. So this is the broad understanding of the concept of culture. Now coming to the concept of cultural heritage. What do I mean by the term cultural heritage? As you would already be aware, the concept of heritage, it simply means something that which is inherited, something that has been given by our ancestors, right? In a cultural context, what is passed on by our ancestors to us is what I mean by the term cultural heritage. And I've specifically avoided the usage of the term cultural rights or cultural duties, or even for that matter the concept of cultural property. Why the usage of cultural heritage and not the usage of cultural property or cultural rights? When we talk about modern democracies, it is very easy to for us to get caught in this dichotomy of rights versus duties. Whose right it is and whose duty it is. So when we talk about culture, we have to broaden our vision, broaden our perspective and look at it from what you call as a heritage angle, which envisages both rights, duties and ownership of our cultural heritage. So that is the reason why I've used the term cultural heritage as opposed to speaking about cultural rights in the constitution or cultural property in the constitution. in that context. So that, as I've already stated, what the constitution says about culture, how you respect culture, or what is the linkage between culture and the constitution, plays a very important role in terms of how the people, the nation, and the government views the concept of culture, right? So the term culture broadly is found, the word culture is found around 133 constitutions of the world. Culture is referred to even in countries such as dictatorial or authoritarian regimes such as North Korea. So they say that culture is what the state decides, it is not what the people decide. So there are also certain theological states that run on the basis of a particular official religion. They also say that culture is our religion. So these can be the different sort of prisms through which you can view cultural heritage. So that prism is better clarified through our constitution. So when we look at the Indian constitution, it is reflected in various parts, particularly when you talk about questions of language, ethnicity, race, religious practices, etc. So these are the multifarious notions in which the conception of cultural heritage is reflected in the Indian constitution. Until a recent point in time, there was this conception of civilized states. The founders of modern international law, which is the European nations, they tried to monopolize international law and constitutionalism by saying that we are civilized nations as opposed to what you call as the third world countries as being barbarians, right? So this conception of civilized nation has undergone a change to what you call as a civilizational state. There is a distinction between civilized state, which is a pejorative connotation, versus a civilizational state. Recent scholarship in this regard talks about India, China, Turkey, and certain other countries as civilizational states, in the sense that when you talk about India or China, though the concept of a modern Chinese state is traced to say the 1950s and India to the year 1947, the concept of Indian civilization or Chinese civilization predates thousands of years. So when these countries form themselves into what you call as a nation state, they necessarily have to look at their civilizational aspects in their understanding of the constitution. At the end of the day, we need not be shackled by what you call as the nation state understanding of sovereignty, which you can say broadly emanates out of the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648. So we can reinvent our constitutionalism and constitution in tune with the rich cultural heritage that we have. That is essentially the notion of civilizational state, and I welcome all of you to read further into that. Moving ahead. So what is the role of cultural heritage in terms of constitution making? Most of you would be aware that the Indian constitution was essentially drafted through what we call as the Constituent Assembly of India. And in these debates, you have a rich tradition of deliberation on broad spheres of cultural heritage. The term culture has been used in the deliberations of the CAD roughly around 325 times in various contexts. So we have to bear in mind that apart from various other factors, culture has been the single most important factor influencing the constitution that we have adopted. In tune with our principles and our tradition, we have created a constitution that accommodates diversity, pluralism, and heterogeneity, as opposed to homogeneity and what you call as monotheism or a sort of monoculture. So the common thread that unites all of us Indians is the concept of Indianness or being a Bharatiya, right? So Indian constitution can in that sense rightly be called as a melting pot. Of course, there have been certain differences, and due to cultural reasons, several reforms and certain other measures have been postponed. The case in point being the Uniform Civil Code, which the constitutional framers felt was not appropriate at that time in point, and deferred that through the inclusion in the directive principles. When we take the example of Panchayati Raj influenced by Gandhianism, that is traced to existing what you call as local self-governance institutions that run through the ages. Other example is the deliberations pertaining to the 5th schedule of the Indian Constitution, which creates special status for tribal areas and tribal states. So that is also a typical example of a case of protection of cultural customary rights of the tribal population. Similar is the case for special status of northeastern states. So these are various dimensions wherein the concept of cultural heritage has been factored in India's constitution making, I would say. Moving ahead, the concept of history of cultural heritage in India. When we look at the study of cultural heritage, what we call as anthropology, archaeology and history, modern archaeology and anthropology is traced to the British era with Sir William Jones, who started the Asiatic Society in the year 1784. Followed by this, you had three regulations brought in by the British government, which for the first time aimed to protect cultural property in India. The first being Bengal Regulation 21 of 1810, followed by Madras Regulation 7 of 1817, and the third being the Act 20 of 1863. So these were the earlier enactments pertaining to regulation of cultural property. So what did these three regulations broadly do? They conferred the British government the power to intervene to protect antiquities and treasures as well as public buildings which were in the verge of disuse. So for the first time, from a legislative angle, a push came in colonial India. Followed by this, you had the conception of archaeological survey. The first archaeological survey of India was Alexander Cunningham, who undertook a mammoth study of the entire nation and surveyed the archaeological monuments remains for the first time and recorded it systematically. This happened in the year 1866. So this was the early, you can say, inception of the conception of cultural heritage in India, so to speak. So what are the laws that actually protect the concept of cultural heritage in India? The first reference point to all Indians is the Constitution of India. So what does the Constitution say about protection of cultural heritage is what we will look into. Other than that, you have a series of legislations that has been drafted by the Parliament to regulate, protect and conserve cultural heritage. These are supplemented by rules, regulations and policies of the government, and on the international level as well, we have a series of conventions and international instruments that protect cultural heritage. And finally, we also look to the judiciary for assistance in terms of protection of cultural heritage. So this is the broad scheme I would be discussing in the other slides. Coming to the direct discussion of cultural heritage in the Constitution of India, what are the provisions that protect cultural heritage in the Constitution of India? You have to have in mind that there are both explicit as well as implicit references to culture and cultural heritage under the Constitution of India. When you talk about implicit references, the first go-to article would be for anyone, Article 19, which confers a broad range of freedoms beginning from the concept of right to freedoms of speech and expression. Because we often view culture as a reflection of what we call as freedom of individual thought, speech and expression. It may also take the tenor or the color of what you call as freedom of assembly, freedom of movement and freedom of association. So broadly, implicit notions of cultural heritage you find mentioned in terms of Article 19, followed by Article 21. It is said that Indianness or culture is a way of life. So what is life without the conception of cultural identity? So an essential tenet of the concept of right to life and personal liberty is the right to enjoy and the benefits of culture. So broadly speaking, we can locate cultural heritage even within Article 21. After this, you have Article 25 and 26, which specifically talk about freedom of religion, but when they have a cultural tenor and tone, there is an interlinkage between freedom of religion and what we call as protection of cultural heritage. Alongside, you have Article 26, which confers religious denomination the freedom to manage religious affairs. So this also has a cultural connotation. Coming to explicit provisions, we have two broad articles in terms of rights, cultural rights in India. That is Article 29 and 30. Article 29, which specifically confers upon all sections of society. It is essentially in the nature of what we call as group rights. The right to conserve their distinct language, script or culture. Any group of individuals who have a distinct language, script or culture have the right to conserve and protect it under the constitution in terms of Article 29. Alongside, you have Article 30, which confers the right on minorities to protect their culture. It is an additional right that is conferred upon the minorities by virtue of the Indian Constitution. These are the rights part. Coming to what you call as the duties part, we have Article 49, which forms part of the directive principles of state policy, which envisages a duty upon the state to protect cultural heritage, particularly what you call as archaeological monuments and ancient sites. So it is the duty of the state to ensure the protection of cultural heritage in accordance with Article 49. We have spoken about cultural rights as citizens, duty of the states under directive principles. Do citizens of India have a duty to protect cultural heritage? Yes, we do. In accordance with Article 51A, two particular clauses, Article 51A, Clause J and I. Clause J talks about the duty of the citizens to conserve the rich and varied cultural heritage of India, and you have Clause I, which talks about protection of public property. When cultural heritage is in public hands, it is the duty of all citizens to protect such public property which is having a cultural connotation. What are the other provisions that talk about cultural heritage in India? The question of language comes into play. Language being an important manifestation of the concept of culture, we have Article 350A and 350B, which creates a sanction upon the state to promote mother tongue at the primary level of education in terms of Article 350A, and you have certain protections for linguistic minorities and the development of language of linguistic minorities in accordance with Article 350B. And finally, there is also a directive to promote Hindi language as the link language of all Indians. So that you find mentioned in accordance with Article 351A, how Hindi language in its Hindustani dialect has to be protected, promoted and developed in consonance with the other languages that you find under the 8th schedule. The 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution lists 22 languages which will have to play a crucial role alongside Hindi and English, which form the official language of the Union. And apart from this, we have classical languages being recognized in India, which are given certain additional benefits, incentives and you can say promotion under the Indian Constitution. Other than that, what are the aspects that deal with cultural heritage? The aspect of who enacts law for the protection of cultural heritage, that you find mentioned under the 7th schedule, list 1, the Union list, entry 67, which states, or which rather confers upon the Union Parliament the power to regulate ancient monuments, archaeological remains and historical sites which are declared to be of national importance. So it is upon the Union Parliament to declare certain sites to be of national importance, and in respect of these sites of national importance, it is the Union Parliament that has the power to enact law and by a corresponding corollary protect, preserve and defend such sites. When you talk about other provisions, you have entry 40 of list 3, the concurrent list, which confers the powers concurrently upon the union and the state governments to regulate, to conserve and to protect by way of law other archaeological remains other than what you call as sites of national importance. So broadly speaking, these are the provisions that speak about cultural heritage under the Indian Constitution. as an extension of the constitution, we necessarily have to look at certain other ancillary legislations. So what are the major other ancillary legislations in India that protect cultural heritage? The first is the Treasure Trove Act of 1878. This British era legislation mandated that any person who finds a treasure, be it in his backyard or anywhere else, he has a duty to report to the collector, to the concerned authorities about and give notice regarding the finding of the treasure. It also provides provision for vesting of ownership in what you call as ownerless treasures, and also provides for taking over of treasures by the government in certain circumstances. This was followed by the Ancient Monuments Preservation Act of 1904. These two were what you call as pre-colonial or pre-constitutional legislation, so to speak. When we talk about independent India, you have what we call as the Ancient and Historical Monuments and Archaeological Remains Declaration of Importance Act of 1951. As we've already discussed, this enactment confers power upon the Parliament to declare certain ancient monuments to be of national importance, enabling the central government to take over the maintenance and upkeep of such ancient monuments and cultural heritage. So this was followed by the 1958 Act, which replaced the 1951 Act, which is more comprehensive, which envisages a role for the Archaeological Survey of India, which plays an important role in the protection of cultural heritage in India. Alongside, you had the Antiquities and Art Treasures Act of 1972, driven by the excessive illicit trafficking and theft of Indian antiquities to foreign jurisdictions. So the Antiquities and Art Treasures Act envisages regulation, recovery and protection of antiquities and art treasures, which may take the form of paintings, idols or books and stuff like that. What you call as tangible cultural heritage in the nature of art treasures and antiquities. So broadly speaking, these are the laws that protect what we call as cultural heritage in India. After that, coming to judicial decisions. So as I've already said, judiciary has played an important role in the protection of cultural heritage in India. So I've listed a few number of cases herein wherein the judiciary has taken a proactive stand. The first being Archaeological Survey of India versus Narendra Anand and others, which relates to the very popular Jantar Mantar monument. So in this case, the Supreme Court stayed the construction of a multi-story building near Jantar Mantar with a view to protect the Jantar Mantar monument from any sort of interference or spoilage on account of this recent construction activity. Then you had Guru Prasad Rao versus State of Karnataka. Once again, the Supreme Court came to the rescue, protecting or rather prohibiting what you call as iron ore mining near the Jambunatheshwara temple in Karnataka, based on the report of an expert committee. Apart from that, it also gave a blanket direction to the Karnataka government to look into all mining activities located near what you call as cultural heritage sites and ensure that any industrial or mining activity is not carried out in a way that brings harm to such cultural heritage sites. That was Guru Prasad Rao judgment. After that, some of you would have heard of this judgment in MC Mehta versus Union of India, which exposes the interrelation between environment protection and protection of cultural heritage. What is popularly known as the Taj Trapezium case, which related to chemical industries in Mathura, Uttar Pradesh, which were polluting apart from the environment, also causing irreparable damage and harm to the World Heritage Site of Taj Mahal. In this case, the Supreme Court issued directions for closure of industries that were causing harm to the world-renowned monument Taj Mahal. After this, you had the Rajiv Mankotia judgment, wherein the Supreme Court denied permission for conversion of a viceregal lodge, which is presently the Rashtrapati Niwas in Shimla, into a 5-star hotel on the grounds of protection of cultural heritage and that it was protected under the 1958 Act, and it could not be converted into a 5-star hotel. And finally, the most important judgment of recent times, the Orissa Mining Corporation judgment, which exposes the interlinkage between tribal rights, cultural rights, and environment protection, also popularly known as the Vedanta judgment, wherein a small tribal community known as the Dhongriya Kond community of Orissa, they fought against a multinational corporation that was trying to usurp their lands under a mining contract that was given by the state of Orissa. So the case related to bauxite mining in the pristine hills of Niyamgiri, which had terrible environmental consequences apart from what you call as holding utmost cultural significance to this Dongriya Kond community, who revered, who worship this Niyamgiri hills as their deity. So in this case, the Supreme Court upheld the cultural rights of this Dongriya Kond community and decreed a complete ban on bauxite mining by this multinational corporation in the area surrounding this tribal jurisdiction. So this was an important moment and a momentous occasion for the tribal community of the nation, who were fighting for not only the preservation of environment but also for the preservation and protection of their way of life. Now coming to the aspect of threats to cultural heritage. What are the threats to cultural heritage? The first and foremost and the biggest threat to cultural heritage is human greed, which reveals itself through illicit trafficking, smuggling, and theft of invaluable antiquities and treasures across jurisdictions. So this amounts to a huge global black market that runs to millions of dollars. So this is the single most persistent threat to cultural heritage in the nature of arts and antiquities, the illegal trade of arts and antiquities. After this, you have the problem of religious fanaticism, which rise the head in various jurisdictions around the world, particularly in the context of armed conflict or what you call as a civil disturbance. In Afghanistan, you had the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas by the Taliban. You had recent examples of destruction of cultural property dating back to thousands of years by ISIS in Syria. You had the local, or rather the Indian case of the destruction of the Babri Masjid. These are examples wherein religious fanaticism has caused irreparable harm to what we rightly call as common heritage of mankind. So religious fanaticism, terrorist attacks, extremist attacks. There have been instances of left-wing extremist groups such as Maoists, Naxalites destroying cultural heritage, temples, idols, etc. in the fight against the Indian government. And apart from that, two important factors being environmental pollution and climate change. How it is causing irreparable damage to cultural heritage and artifacts around the world. Even the heritage and the artifacts that are locked in museums are susceptible to climate change threats. So this is a persistent problem that we have to have in mind. And finally comes the question of public apathy. These factors such as illicit trafficking that are on a larger level, when you see instances of public vandalism wherein lay people like you and me engage in vandalism of cultural property, that is, you can say, deeply shocking, and that shows a sort of disrespect and disregard from our side. So these are broadly speaking what you call as threats to cultural heritage that has to be addressed on a global, national and local level if we are to conserve and protect cultural heritage. In the slides you can see the picture. The first at the top is the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas, the pre-destruction and the post-destruction image. Below you see an antiquity that was stolen from India pre-independence from the Vijayanagara Empire, a statue of Ram, Lakshman and Sita that was stolen and that was returned recently by the British government. And at the top right you have a picture of a woman from the indigenous Andamans, from the community known as Boo. Her name is Boa. She, I believe, died in the year 2010. So what is the relevance of putting up her picture? So not only arts and artifacts, even humans, beings, living and breathing human beings are testaments to culture, what you call as cultural heritage. So she died, and with her a language which was spoken by a tribe who were wiped out by the British colonization of Andaman and Nicobars. The language became extinct. She was the last known speaker. So no, that language, similar to a species, that language has now become extinct. So these are examples. When the last copy of a book or rare manuscript that is destroyed, when a cultural artifact is destroyed, when a person who is the last known speaker of a language dies, we are losing forever a part of human history. So these are factors that we have to bear in mind, which reveals the seriousness of the destruction of cultural heritage or the irreparable impact of loss of cultural heritage. Finally, last but not the least, talking about dimensions of cultural heritage. Cultural heritage has what you call as a cross-cutting nature. Cultural heritage has significance in terms of protection of tribal and indigenous rights. So when you protect cultural and indigenous rights, you are also protecting cultural heritage. When you are protecting the environment from degradation and we are taking efforts to remedy climate change, you are conserving and protecting cultural heritage. Intellectual property rights also has a bearing upon cultural heritage. Geographical indications, traditional knowledge, arts, literature, folklore, oral histories, when these are documented, preserved and conserved through the use of IPR regime, you are conserving and protecting and ensuring that you are leaving a legacy to the future generations. And coming to the aspect of ownership and responsibility towards cultural heritage. Who owns cultural heritage and whose responsibility it is to protect cultural heritage? These are all larger questions. Is it individual ownership, or is it state, or is it common heritage of all of mankind? These are all questions. As they say, the responsibility of all is the responsibility of none. So that is also a question that we have to have in mind. Coming to destruction of cultural heritage, two aspects come to the fore. One is what you call as repatriation of cultural artifacts. When you look at most of European museums, including the world-renowned British Museum of History, a large chunk of the artifacts that are housed in British museums are stolen artifacts, or they were taken away under circumstances that is far from ethical, and they are locked thousands of miles away from the indigenous people who actually own or who have ownership or who have a relation with these cultural heritage. So this brings the fact of repatriation or bringing back cultural heritage to their home jurisdiction or to the place wherein this cultural artifacts are actually revered and respected. Recently there was a decision by the incumbent US president to repatriate or to send back roughly 16,000 stolen and illicitly trafficked artifacts from Iraq that was brought to United States of America in the backdrop of the US-Iraq invasion. Then comes the question of restitution of cultural heritage. Existing monuments, treasures, sites and remains, are they protected properly? What is the level of funding that these properties receive? For every new monument or statue or any site or building that is constructed, we also have to introspect and look into what is the level of care and attention that is taken to existing archaeological sites and remains that are left in the lurch. So these are questions that come to our head when we speak about the concept of dimensions of cultural heritage, broadly speaking. Finally, I'll stop and conclude my speech with a quote from Lord Curzon, who, while delivering a lecture or rather an address in the Asiatic Society meeting in the year 1910, quoted thus: "Art and beauty and the reverence that is owing to all that is evoked human genius or has inspired human faith are independent of creeds, and insofar as they touch the sphere of religion, are embraced by the common religion of all mankind." Viewed from this standpoint, the rock temple of the Brahmins stand on precisely the same footing as the Buddhist Vihara and the Mohammedan Masjid, as the Christian cathedral. There is no principle of artistic discrimination between the mausoleum of the despot or the sepulchre of the saint. What is beautiful, what is historic, what tears the mask of the face of the past and helps us to read its riddles and look it in the eyes, these and not the dogmas of combative theology are the principal criteria to which we must look. So these were the words of Lord Curzon. Nothing can capture more beautifully the relevance of cultural heritage than this. So these were my concluding remarks. With that, I wind up this discussion. If you have any questions, you may ask them now. I thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, queries, you may ask now. Yes? Manu? Go ahead. Yes, certainly. That is a typical example. That is why I listed that as an example of the concept of destruction of cultural heritage, how religious fanaticism has resulted in the destruction of the Babri Masjid. Certainly. To an extent, it was without question a failure on the part of the state to protect a cultural heritage, without question, certainly. So that is why I say there is a need to introspect on various aspects, certainly. And at this point in time, I would also, because he raised the question of Babri Masjid, I would advise the students to read or refer to an enactment known as the Places of Worship Act of 1991, which was enacted in the year 1991 by the then P.V. Narasimha Rao regime. So that creates a sort of freezing point, right, to prevent any such religious disputes in respect of what you call as cultural property, which has a religious connotation to it. It says that from the day of our independence, 1947, the date on which we got the independence, from that date, whatever existing temples or religious places of worship exist, they will remain frozen, in the sense that in the course of history, a particular temple may have been a part of a particular sect of Hinduism. Subsequently, another sect may have established a deity within that same temple, right? So you are not supposed to change the nature of worship or the nature of denomination that a temple has. So retrospectively, now you cannot question or you cannot convert a particular place of religious worship, right? A masjid cannot be converted into a temple cannot be converted into a masjid, or a temple, if it belongs to a particular sect of the community, it cannot be converted by another sect of the community, and it also imposes a punishment, including criminal punishment, for a person who does the same, right? So the irony of the enactment is that the act came in the year 1991. That act specifically excluded the Babri Masjid from the application of the enactment. So the saving clause of that enactment specifically said that nothing in this act which prohibits the conversion of one religious site into another will apply to the Babri Masjid, because it was viewed as a continuing dispute which was excluded. So these are all questions that we have to ask ourselves, particularly the next generation, when we look about what legacy are we going to leave for the future generation. Wonderful. Yes. Thank you, Barsha. Anybody else? Any other questions? If you may have, the floor is open. You can even, if you are like to, you can post it in the chat box as well. Fine. I take that no further questions. The other students from constitutional law, do you have any questions? Fine. Okay. Thank you for your cooperation. Thank you for joining the lecture. It's been a wonderful session. Hopefully, let us take this tradition, and still the floor is open because the constitutional law students are here. I welcome any submission or presentation or any clip that you would like to give for this concept of World Constitution Day. You can look into worldconstitutionday.org. It can be a sort of a student discussion. It may be on a specific issue. If you are interested, kindly do send in. Right? So it is, though the day is today, it's still open for a few days after. It is almost a week-long celebration. So I encourage you to submit or contribute something from your part, from the student's part. It may be anything. It may be a change that you wish to see in the Indian Constitution, or it may be on a specific topic that you would like to discuss. Right? Thank you very much. It's been wonderful speaking to you. If nothing further, I will end this session. No further questions if there are no further questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.